Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for those of you coming back after this morning's Adapt A training session. We're running another Brightspace training session now, this time looking at the other half of Adapt. I don't know that that's an even split, don't quote me on it, but they've been divided into A and B. And the Adapt training sessions, for those of you coming here for the first time, are focusing on particularly around the scenario of having a migrated subject site. Where the content has been brought over by the migration team from Blackboard into Brightspace. And so what we're going to be looking at in this session particularly is the aspect of setting up assessment shells, which is a huge part of this new process. The assessment tool is different. The tool set that we use is different. And so we're going to be digging into that today for those people that are looking at creating assessment shells, and I will unpack what we're getting into when we talk about assessment shells in this session. Where it sits in the continuum of things, again, for people that were not here this morning, the Adapt sessions deal with building or working with existing content and assessment within a master subject site in Brightspace, as opposed to the Engage sessions, which will kick off next month, and they deal with session subject sites and our business as usual process of delivery. So if in the context of assessment, that would mean how we approach grading and providing feedback, moderation, etc., those processes. In Adapt, we look at building the assessment tasks themselves within the master site, ready to be pushed out. Now, we will be stopping at different points in time, obviously, for questions, but please feel free to add your questions, comments, etc., along the way within the chat. And I believe I'll have Amy or others in there as well, picking up on those. If not, it'll be me scrolling back through the chat necessarily. If you've got a burning question, raise your hand and I'll get to that as well. Otherwise, yes, the session is being recorded. You'll have access to both the recording and any artifacts from the session today being used. And I'm going to add the PowerPoint deck that I'm referring to into the chat again now for you. I aim to do most of the training as much as possible within the system itself, rather than reading to you from slides. But where I am looking at particular parts of the deck, I'll let you know which slides I'm looking at. I'll just do a quick acknowledgement of country. Again, this is the second of the sessions today, but it's important that I acknowledge the Wiradjuri, Ngunnawal, Gundungurra and Biripi peoples of Australia, who are the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which CSU's campuses are located, and pay my respect to their elders, both past, present and emerging. And particularly welcome any Indigenous peoples here in the session today. I'm going to get right into what we're focusing on today, which is assessment building, assessment shells, rubrics, and the different assessment tools available in Brightspace. And in the context of a migrated subject site, what that looks like and what you need to consider. That's what we want to dig into. The way that it's divided on the agenda as such, I'll give a little bit of context in terms of the editing tool set as we go along, but I really want to focus in on that aspect of building assessment and understanding the difference between preparing them in the master and when we deal with them within the session subject sites. Okay, so I'm going to jump straight to I'll provide this context again of the distinction between master and session subject sites. In Brightspace, that distinction is made through the subject code with an M dash at the beginning of the subject code for a master site. That's where we build our assessment shells, as opposed to a session subject site where we have S dash at the beginning and a session number afterwards. Bede, as to your comment earlier on, where we noticed that there was a cohort number after the subject code. Ignore that. It's a bug. It shouldn't be there. It's just the session code that we'll be looking for. There won't be any cohorts when we actually see them in the site. So they're looking into why that's appearing. It certainly shouldn't, because we don't have separate sites for different cohorts. We have the one site for the session. So that's going to disappear very shortly. And we're going to be building our assessments in the master site, which has no grade center attached, no grade book. We need to create an assessment for every cohort. That's something you need to understand in building, is that every assessment that we build, every shell will need to have one in place for every cohort that will be in the subject. So if you've got Port Macquarie internal, Bathurst distance, Wagga internal, 3 cohorts, we need 3 versions clearly labelled of the same task. We'll go through that process of building those out within the master. One thing that I'll draw your attention to, again, if you're here this morning, you would have gotten a copy of the migration equivalence table. I'm sharing it again in the chat as we're talking. That document makes reference to some of the assessment tools that you previously would have been used to in Blackboard. In I2, so specifically, we're getting at things like EASE. EASE no longer exists in Brightspace. We don't use it for submitting assessments. The tool will be turned off and not made visible after the middle of next year anyway, for anyone still within Blackboard. All of our assessment submission, primarily within Brightspace, happens within the native tool set using the Brightspace assessment tools. We're going to have a look at those. If you have folders within your Interact 2 site that were labeled as assessment, assessment 1, 2, 3, etc., with content within them, and I can find some examples for us to look at here. Here is a migrated subject site. It has all of the folders that have been brought across from Interact 2, waiting for the academic to look at them. If we scroll to the bottom of the list, any hidden folders will have been dragged there. And what we can see going down, we have a few that need some sort of action or decision around them. Old folders with online tutorial meeting recordings. That's probably going to need to be deleted, I'm guessing. Moving forwards, those tutorials, if they're done through Zoom, the Zoom tool's located somewhere else now under communication, online meetings. That's where that tool is going to be found, and any recordings made in Zoom will be available in there. If we've got assessment information, for example, they have a case study for assessment 1. If we open up that old folder from Blackboard and have a look at the content that was in there, we had information about submitting to Turnitin. This is what we did with the old Turnitin link. All of this stuff can go. It's not going to be relevant for us when we work within Brightspace. Leaving it hidden, I guess, is an option if you don't want to do anything with it, but the students cannot see this because it's just going to lead them down the garden path in terms of process. Looks like they've copied information out of the subject outline previously. Maybe that needs to be provided again to the students, but it's not going to be given to them within their content, within their learning materials. It'll need to be made a part of the assessment item, and we're going to make some of those in a minute. So you've got to work through each of those items and decide, is there any value in that content still? Does it need to be reprovisioned somewhere else? In a discussion forum thread, in an assessment item, maybe as an announcement? But unless it's part of the core learning material content for the subject, it can't be visible to the students. So either hide it, delete it, but don't make that folder visible to them. All right. Now, let's just keep my deck over here so I can see. I'm jumping to about slide 16 at the moment in the deck, just to have a look briefly at the editing tool set that we talked about briefly. I'll have a look within my sandbox. The reason I'm talking about the editor is because when we go to make assessments, so we have an assessment tab at the top in our subject sites. If we go into assignments, and I appreciate that there is a distinction being made here between assessment as a general category and the Brightspace assignment tool. Assignments here is referring to any text-based submission in terms that we traditionally would have used either EASE or a Turnitin submission portal for. Any text-based submission going into this tool will be captured under the Brightspace assignments tool, and most of our time today is going to be spent in here. So I'm going to open that up. When we create new assignments within this tool, and there's a big button here, new assignment, we're working with the Brightspace editor. So that's why I've left that slide in the deck on slide 16, looking at the Brightspace editing tool set. It's also called a WYSIWYG. When you build your instructions for assessments, you will have access to the same functionality that you have when you build out any content item. What that means is that apart from just putting text straight in here, you can use the insert stuff tool, which means third-party content from your computer, from Panopto, from other parts of other subject sites, video notes, YouTube links, external links, even embedded objects. All of these can be added into your assessment instruction if you want, or you could just type it in, or you could be taking this sort of information we were looking at a minute ago from those old assessment folders. You can copy and paste that into your assessment instructions if you need to. If you feel that there's still value in providing this information to students, that's where you're going to be putting it, inside your assignment instruction. This tool also will allow you to add attachments if you need to. Underneath there is an attachment link. So you can upload files, PDFs, Word, etc., and attach those to your assessment instructions. You can also provide hyperlinks there if you need to. But there is also a record audio and record video function available underneath. So if you want to provide spoken instruction to go with the assessment, you can do that. If you want to record a video in terms of your webcam coming on and you talking to the task, you can do that as well. This same set of functionality is available against every content item in Brightspace. So it's important that you're aware when you're building your assignments in Brightspace that you have all of those tools still at your disposal. Before I go any further, I'm going to provide the quick guide for building assignments. So even if you don't listen to anything I have to say at this point and you want to just follow the steps from woe to go, you're absolutely welcome to do that. But that's what I'm going to be referring to. So I'm going to provide the building assignment quick guide, which looks like LMS quick guide assignments. Here we go. That's the one. So this guide is what I've given to you. And I will stop there and look at Mark's question for a second because it is absolutely relevant. Is it to complement what's in the subject outline? Absolutely. So the subject outline remains the source of truth in our subject sites for students. So you've got a decision to make around what level of detail you want to provide in your assessment instruction. Some people literally will take all of the information that's provided underneath the task detail in the subject outline and repaste it again. Jen wants to know where the subject outline is. Good question, Jen. In the subject outline, the link in production is currently hidden. What it's going to look like, I'm happy to show you that. They're just ironing out the way that it appears currently, but I'm happy to show you. Within your system homepage, when you first enter Brightspace, the tool link to go into the subject outline to build out your outlines, to do QA, to do your drafting, is up here in the nav. In terms of where it is for students, it will be in the session subject site. So I better find me a session subject site. I'll go up to my course selector, the waffle up the top, and I'm looking for an S dash. Here's an S dash for a session subject site. I should have gone to the marketing one. Underneath the My Subject menu, the first option that we're going to see there is Subject Outline. That's where it's going to live. And that will then open up the Subject Outline view, the same that you've had in I2 all along. If you've got multiple cohorts, let's see if these guys have one in place. They choose from there, it opens up the Subject Outline tool in situ within the browser. So the Subject Outline will be visible within the subject site underneath the My Subject menu as the first option. That's where it's going to be made live. So I'd probably give that a couple of weeks before you're able to see it. But again, it's an object for the session subject sites. The master subject site, it'll be in exactly the same spot.
Lockie, will it download a PDF or will it open up in those silly little bits that it opens up in now?
Well, let me click on it just so you can see.
Oh God, it's still in the silly little bits.
bits. Yeah.
Silly little bits.
I don't know who thought that was a good idea.
Somebody who uses tablets.
Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, you can print the PDF version up the top. There's a button there to get hold of it. You can certainly get the PDF version from the back end, from the subject outline tool itself. But this same relationship still exists within Brightspace as well. But that's where it's going to be. Let me stop there. I'll take a sip of my coffee. Is there anyone with a burning question or comment that they'd like to raise at this point in time?
The other document that you showed up, which is the building of the assessment item, is this a website or a document?
It's a document. I'm looking at it because it's shared within. I put it in the chat, Rahina. Did you get a copy of it?
That's what I was looking for.
I'll put it in again.
Yes, please.
No problem.
Lachlan, it's Mark. Sorry,
Mark.
I'm probably the irritant, the chatty student.
Not at all.
Turnitin. Like we were using Turnitin as the submission portal. So what will be the relationship between Brightspace and Turnitin?
Yep,
You're allowed to say,
absolutely show you.
You're allowed to say, that'll come later when we do the delivery training, so you can park it if you want. I don't want to hijack it.
No, not at all. We're going to absolutely get into it. I'm going to show you what it looks like and where it is in that relationship because it bears relevance here. But we'll get to that shortly. Absolutely. All right, let's keep going with building our assessment item, and then all shall be revealed, I promise. So
sorry, just before you do that, I'm still a bit puzzled by the need to add to the assessment content in Brightspace when we have already created the subject outline and published a month before. So why do we need to do that in Brightspace?
So what I would say is that it's discretionary, absolutely, in the first instance. If you feel that everything that's in the subject outline is completely adequate and all you need is the title for the assessment, and maybe something in the instructions, for example, that is along the lines of please refer to the subject outline for complete task information, you're absolutely able to do that. It's just that some people choose to provide more information underneath instructions within the LMS itself, rather than just saying it's in the subject outline. It is discretionary.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
No worries. All right. What I want to do, I'm going to bring up that quick guide that I was referring to because I'm going to work through these steps with you now. I'm not going to read from the document directly, but this, if you want to follow along from here, you certainly can. I'm going to move that over here. When we go to make an assignment, the first thing that we want to do with making a shell is the labeling of the task. So I've got here by clicking on the assignment menu and clicking on new assignment, I'm now going to label the task itself. What we want to do when we do our labeling is make sure that we're including the target cohort for this assessment. So if I started by saying it's going to be for Bathurst distance, at that point, I also like to include the assessment number. If you know this already from the schedule, so if it's going to be the second or the third task, then we want to provide the title for the assessment as per the subject outline if you can. At this point in time, I'll just give it a fairly generic name. If, however, your title for your assessment doesn't identify the text type, for whatever reason, you need to provide that here, put it in brackets. Now, because I've called this essay, I don't need to do that. But if it was called something generic, like times like these, for whatever reason, some people like to call their assessments all sorts of things, and it hasn't identified what the submission type is, what the expected text type is, then provide it in brackets to the students. Don't put in a grade for the task in the master subject site. That information is pulled automatically in the session subject site by its relationship with the subject outline. It pulls that information in. So we don't put in a grade here. We don't put in a due date here. These fields stay empty. If you're going to put in instructions, then you put them in here. If you're going to add attachments, etc., you can do that by clicking on these icons and adding them. If you're going to do audio instructions, you can do that underneath. we now start looking at customizing our assessment. Availability dates and conditions, this is for your reference. We don't put any information in here in the master subject site, but what it includes are things like start and end date, which is visibility to the students. When can they see it in the system? This is not a due date. This is visibility. Release conditions, we start to get into people that want to provide certain tasks only to certain groups, etc. That's what release conditions allow you to do. Releasing content or assessment or discussion items only to special groups. We don't fiddle around with that generally within the master subject site. Special access, we're going to spend a lot more time looking at when we get into the engage sessions, because special access will allow us to handle things like extensions. At that point, we can actually determine individual users or bulks, groups of users who get extra weeks, extra days, extra periods of time for when they can submit their assessments. So I'm not getting into it today in terms of how we do it, but I'm just telling you that the system has a far better way of accommodating extensions than what we previously had to deal with within Blackboard. So that first section, availability dates and conditions, has information in it that we would generally customize in the session subject site, not the master subject site. The next section, submission and completion, is absolutely important for our master subject site version. This is where we get into deciding, is it an individual student assignment or a group assignment? Category underneath. How can I explain categories? Categories in Brightspace refers to ways that you can group your content or your assessments. Really, it's just a subheading that will just organize where things sit on the page. This has got nothing to do with cohorts as such. When we set up our grade center columns and our assignments directed to particular groups, etc., that's not what category refers to. It's really just if you want to organize any of your information under subheadings, you can create categories for it. Otherwise, ignore it. Submission type underneath, most of our assessments obviously are going to be file submissions. The students upload something. However, there are other options in here. Text submission would be them typing on the spot within the tool. So there may be some use case for that sort of situation, like an exam, for example, where we want them to type in on the spot rather than uploading a document from somewhere else. The last one, observations. So if you're doing OSCEs, for example, you could use this observed in person option as the submission type as well. So that by far and away, most of us will be creating file submissions for students as our assessment time. Just let me move a few things around over here so I can see the chat still. Okay, so we're going to work through creating a file submission assessment here. How many files do we want the students to be able to submit? Previously, a limitation that we had, for example, with Turnitin submission portals was they could only submit one file per portal. We don't have that limitation anymore in this tool. So if you need them to submit 3 files, leave this as unlimited. They can submit as many files as are required for the task. If you specifically want them only to have one file that they're submitting, then you can change it to 1 file. Underneath, we have allowable file extensions. By default, we have no restrictions selected, but if we hit our drop-down, you'll see we've got PDF only, annotatable, files that can be previewed without conversion, images and videos, custom file types. I would suggest if this is a text submission of any sort, select the last option, compatible with Turnitin. I'm going to show you why shortly. We'll look at some samples of submitted assessments and what that looks like, the end result. But for now, I'm going to say if this is a text-based submission and you want Turnitin to be able to give you an originality score against the submission, this option needs to be selected. Compatible with Turnitin. Do you want to keep all submissions when the students upload? This will keep a track record of everything that they've uploaded. Or do you only want to keep the most recent submission? Lastly, there's a notification email section. Unless you want to get an email every time a student submits an assessment, I would highly recommend you leave this blank. there are other ways for us to see that they're submitting their tasks. If you're a sucker for punishment, however, by all means, put your email in there. Keeping in mind that this is the master subject site, so we really want a pristine version of the assignment shell rather than the version that we're going to be dealing with in session. All right. I'll collapse this for a second and have a look and see if we've got a question there about PebblePad submissions.
Don't even need me today. You got it all under control, Lucky.
I'm just multitasking. I don't have an update other than at the moment, PebblePad will work the same way that it has been working with Interact 2. There is an LTI and integration for it that's being looked at. It's not available in production yet, so I can't give you an update on that. That's what I've got on PebblePad at the moment. Okay, let's get into the third area that we can customize for our assignment, which is evaluation and feedback. At this point in time, it's asking about rubrics. Do we want to add rubrics in here? We absolutely should have a rubric connected to our assessments. We have to create them using a rubric building process. And I have a quick guide exactly for that purpose for you that I will share in the chat. But we are going to spend some time looking at the rubric tool in just a minute. We'll deal with rubrics shortly, but for now, I'm just going to select one that I've made before. So I can add an existing rubric. In this case, I did say it was an essay, so a qualitative rubric. I've made one here. That'll do. Essay. I can preview it on the right-hand side if I need to, but I'm going to add that one for now. Ignore the learning objectives section. That's not relevant for us. We're not using the learning objectives tool within Brightspace at the moment. And hopefully that will disappear shortly rather than you worrying about what it's for. Our learning outcomes, etc., are captured within the subject outline, within CDAP, within our other systems. We're not dealing with them in Brightspace at the moment. You want to make sure that the annotation tools are checked. We want to be able to mark up assessments that are submitted. Don't worry about the hiding of student names during assessment. We want to know who they are, and there are other ways to handle moderation and blind marking. So leave that blank. The last thing that you do need to do down the bottom is the Manage Turn It In option, because it is not turned on by default. So you have to click on Manage Turn It In for each assessment, go in and turn on the similarity report for this one. It's now creating in the background a Turnitin portal for this task. We definitely want the learners to be able to see their similarity scores when they're submitting, so check that second box. And we want similarity checking against all submissions. And the answer to your question, Ali, in the background there is they're not at the moment. So you would need to be copying and pasting those cells, for example, that you've created in that Excel document into the tool. I know they're looking at a way to transfer them, but I don't have a yes answer for you of you can simply upload those existing Turnitin rubrics at the moment. All right, when we've clicked on additional settings for our Turnitin portals, some of them you'll see are grayed out because Brightspace takes carriage of that. File types, late submissions, etc. All of those are handled by the LMS. So they're grayed out. If we scroll down, we'll see that it's going to generate similarity reports, but it also prevents students from resubmitting. I would be changing that to students can resubmit until the due date. And then you have decisions to make around what type of exclusion do you want with Turnitin. Are you excluding your reference lists, for example, your citations, your small sources? However you approach the setting up of your portals, you need to check or leave those unchecked depending on your preference. And then the last options that are checked are where we normally store our Turnitin assignments. They go into the global repository. It's checking against website content, periodicals, journals, etc. So those are fairly standard for Turnitin. And if you are using a template that you want excluded from the Turnitin check, if you've been doing this up until now, you'll know how to do that. you can upload those templates in here as well, and it will exclude those from the similarity check. Checking on this save these settings for future use, unfortunately, is useless and does not work. So they need to be checked each time you create your assessment shells in the back end of Brightspace. So I'm going to submit that and stop because I know we've got some questions coming. So Amy, where are we at there? Oh, she might be tied up. I can go back through the chat. Are the rubrics created? Well, yeah, no, unfortunately they're not at the moment, Ali. But it is a fairly simple process to cut and paste those cells across into the rubric creator, but they can't simply be uploaded as such. Bede was asking about, you could cut and paste from the existing one from Word. Yep, same process. Then what have we got here? Warwick is asking about giving other people access to your master subject site. So the way it works currently is that the identified individuals that the migration team will be given access to the subject site, so the convener and others, but it is meant to be, we'll be able to use the access tool to so for school admin, faculty admin, etc., course admin, we'll be able to provide access to the subject sites in the same way that we've been using through the access system. Whether or not it can be done by individual subject conveners to the master, I may have to take that question offline to get a definitive answer for you. But I know that the process moving forward is meant to be, we use access to provide access to give individuals different levels of access to the subject sites. And if students have an extension, does it allow resubmissions up until the extension date? Yes, Chantel is the short answer. If that option within Turnitin allowed for them to resubmit up until the due date, they'll be able to keep doing that or drafting effectively up until that point in time. All right, I'm going to hit save here to close out the Turnitin settings. And then I'm going to save and close, keeping in mind, as with all of our new objects within Brightspace, it is hidden by default. So that toggle down the bottom, it's not going to be visible to students until this is made toggled off and made visible. Keeping in mind that this is a master subject site, so no student will be seeing it here. It's not until it's pushed out to the sessions that it will be made visible. I think one of the easiest ways, I'll hit save and close here and show you what that assessment now looks like. I've got a list of every assignment that I've created in the past. And if I scroll down, I can see, here's the one that I just made. And that each of the assessments that you create, particularly using the assignment tool, will have these icons next to it, which will let you know what sort of functionality or what settings have been turned off or on. So for example, visibility is the eye with the line through it. So this one's currently hidden. When it's connected to the grade center, it'll have this blue ribbon next to it, showing that it's a gradable item with a score. And then if Turnitin has been turned on, and this is probably the more valuable one for you right now, it'll have these binoculars with the item next to it. So if you're not sure that the Turnitin portal has been set up for it, the similarity check, you look for those binocular icons next to your assignment item. So this one that we just made, Turnitin has been turned on. What I think would be useful is to show you what this tool looks like when you're looking at a submitted assignment for students, so you can see where Turnitin now sits in this system. So if I can find an assignment that has a submission in it, let's try this one. Okay. So what we have here is an assignment where I've got two students in my hypothetical subject. One of them is submitted. There is their assignment. Here is their Turnitin score listed in the same area. At that point, I can click on the originality report number if I want to unpack that, and it opens in a new browser tab showing us the Turnitin assignment with our red similarity score indicators available on the right-hand side. So we no longer have the blue feedback studio options that allow us to mark up and annotate the student's assignment within Turnitin. All we have at this point in time are those red tools. Ignore the AI detector. You're probably aware this is about to disappear for us, not going to be visible, but you can certainly access the similarity report to look at the originality of the document that way. But that workflow now changes slightly in that the score itself is embedded within that dashboard against each of the student submissions. And you can either view it by the user list, the names of the students and their submissions, or you can change to a submission view, which will only show things that have been submitted for assignments that have been submitted rather than the list of the users themselves. So there's a toggle between users and submissions. When we actually click on the student's assignment, it's going to open up our preview of the assignment. And this is probably the thing that some of you wanted to know more than anything else. We get a preview of the student's submission loading in here. And within that preview, we're then able to use a range of markup tools, annotation tools to edit. And that could either be using a highlighter, for example. If you wanted to draw attention to certain things, you can do that. It has sticky notes built within it if you're inclined to use sticky notes to provide commentary. This bit, you can click those all over the place. You can also drag them around if you need to. It's got text boxes. If you want to put text in to one part of the assignment, you can do that. You can drag those around if you need to. You can draw relational lines if you need to. You can download it. You can print it. You can full screen it. But effectively, the annotation tool set available in here for you to work on text-based submissions is quite comprehensive, I would say, compared to what was available previously in Turnitin, if you were using the Turnitin submission portals before. So you can work within the preview. And then on the right-hand side, if there's a rubric attached to the assignment, you'll see it here. We can click on the rubric and it will open up each of the individual criterion, and you will be able to select whichever one you feel it fits within. This is a qualitative rubric, so it's just using our standard HD through to fail scales. And within each of those criterion, you can then add feedback against each one. So not just feedback at the end, your summative feedback, you can also provide feedback against individual criterion as well. And you'll see the WYSIWYG, the options for feedback and tools there are available as well. So if you had external commentary against those criteria and you wanted to put in from somewhere else, you could use the insert stuff function and add those in as well. I know there's a question in there about saving comments. Now, at the moment, I'm not aware of a comment bank type function that's available within the preview screen here. So if we're thinking quick marks in Turnitin or other screens, there isn't a quick mark function that I'm aware of that can be used within this preview screen. I'm going to take that away as a question to get a more definitive answer on where and how, but I haven't found one yet that we can use within this section. After you've worked through your criterion and selected which ones added feedback against each, if you're inclined to do so, scrolling to the bottom, you've got your actual grade. That would go in there, along with your feedback for the end of the task. The editor's there again, so you can add in a commentary from elsewhere or video feedback. Underneath, you'll find that there's audio and video available that you can attach to each of the assessments as they're coming in. You can also add files to the feedback. So we couldn't do that in Turnitin. We could certainly do that now. If you've made your commentary, your feedback, your files, if you've got marking guides, whatever it is that you might attach to individual assignments, you can now attach those to the assessment here as well. And you'll either see depending on permissions and roles and marking within the session site, the ability to either save the draft, which will then be published later on to the students, or publishing, which means going into the grade center and the student getting the feedback. Those are the two options we end up looking for. I'm going to stop there because I can see a whole lot of questions coming through. Amy, are you around?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just lost track of which one you had already answered. I won't lie. I think we're up to maybe Jennifer with the USSY assessments. Did you answer that one yet?
Creating satisfactory, unsatisfactory. Okay. So
can they resubmit?
They will be able to resubmit up until the due date, particularly if you've got that Turnitin setting on that allows for resubmissions up until the due date.
This is after the due date. So I just had a nightmare with Turnitin for the subject that they can, if they don't get one section of the rubric satisfactory, then it means you have to send it back to them. They get 7 days to resubmit. I had to download every assessment and upload it myself back into Turnitin, and then download it and mark it, and then upload it back into Turnitin again.
Okay, so the way that this will fix that problem, in my head at least, is that because extensions, let's say the student had an extension, that it changes the due date for that student. So Turnitin says, right, the due date now for that student is this new date, so it's no longer late, which means they can resubmit.
Okay, so I just have to go in and change the due date for each of the students that had to resubmit.
We deal more with extensions and things when we get into Engage, but basically there is a process that will allow you to either bulk change a whole group of students to get an additional 7 days, for example, rather than having to do it individually. And that will flow through as their actual due dates in the system for all of them. So it shouldn't have to be done one by one. It'll be done as a cohort for that particular scenario of the auto 7-day extension.
The next question was, one of the problems we had this year was how to deal with group assignments in the Turnitin portal. It looks like Brightspace allows to easily set up tutorial groups. Will this be able to be applied to assignment submissions too?
Look, I might have to take that one offline a little bit because the group tool certainly allows you to have a bunch of people all submitting as part of the one collective as they appear within the gradebook. In terms of what that means for Turnitin, I haven't played around with it yet, so I can't give you a definitive answer. So I'll need to take that offline and follow it up. But I certainly can do that. I'm happy to do that.
Beautiful. Back to Jennifer. Does it save comments for reuse? So could you download and mark in Norfolk?
I'm going to need to take that one offline and have a play around with it. I haven't sort of had a look between Norfolk and Brightspace taking a comment bank from one to the other, but I know that there are some explorations at the moment around a comment bank facility within this tool. I would prefer it to all sit within the LMS so that we have that functionality available in this system rather than people having to jump between different platforms. But I'm not going to say it's not possible until I've seen it with my own eyes. So I'll come back to you on that one.
He's thorough. Let's just say that. So I've got from Ellie, assuming grade flows through to grade center, and would it be
once it's published, it
one
does,
dash one of 0 for satisfactory, unsatisfactory?
No, so that's a Blackboard thing, particularly when we're dealing with setting up ways for Blackboard to recognize a number as satisfactory, unsatisfactory. So that's slightly more complex. And to be honest, Ali, I'm going to have to get an answer from the guys setting up the gradebook to find out how they've dealt with the schema. But there are ways to set up the task so that it's not about a number, but rather a setting of satisfactory versus unsatisfactory. But we don't put in grades in the master, so you don't need to worry about it at this point. So create the shell. Don't worry about the actual satisfactory, unsatisfactory bit just yet. I'll make a quick guide. There you go.
The next one was from Chantel. If it's a scale from any of the marks in that grade, does it allow for you to choose where in that grade scale the student lies? In example, here you've selected HD on one of the criteria, but does it allow you to give an 85% for one student and then 95 for the next, and then add all the marks together?
Okay, so what I'd be calling that at that point is a quantitative rubric, for example. So as in the system will calculate those grades, and we absolutely have the ability to do that within this system. The quantitative rubric tool will not only allow you to select where on the continuum their grade sits, but also to grade within a range. So we deal more with using that tool set for grading, assessment, etc. when we get into Engage. But maybe if I walk through the rubric creation process now, I'll show you exactly how you can do that. But what it involves is selecting on which particular scale the student has achieved, and then you actually get to select the number, and it'll give you the full range to work between. So you can grade within a range is the short answer.
So that's an update from what we've been able to do this year, right?
That's right. Absolutely.
That's great.
Yeah.
Oh, I love it. There's some thumbs up, some smiles. Gotta love that. And then I have Bede. So Bede would like to know. So do you have to load all of your assessments into each separate cohort?
Okay,
and how do you set the date after which students can access their marked assessments? There might be two separate ones.
They are two separate questions. Let me first get to duplication because that's important, definitely. When you've got your assignment lists, looking at your dashboard with all of your listed assignments, let's say I created one here for Bathurst distance. At this point, what we want to do is hit the drop down next to it, and I can copy this assignment. And all we're doing at that point is changing the cohort that it's for. So at that point, if this was for Wagga internal, change the name, and then you'll have the same assignment with all of the same settings attached to it. You're just changing the name, and then it will be available now for two cohorts rather than one. So the duplication of your assignments is easy. You don't have to go through all of the other aspects of creation each time. You can just copy the assignment. Second part, how do you set the date after which students can access their marked assessments? So we're not going to get into, I guess, the changing of the date range, because the due date aspect we deal with in Engage in the session subject site. We don't deal with it in the master itself when we create the shells. That's why we leave the date range empty. The short answer is it's that first aspect of customizing the assessment. We go to edit under availability dates and special access. That's where we end up changing who can see what when. That's where that lives. Next one, Ames?
No more.
No more. Okay. And I'm aware that time is racing away from me, as it always does. So let's look at rubrics briefly. I'm going to refer to the rubric creation quick guide, which I shared in the chat earlier. But effectively, the rubric tool, best way to go is to build your rubrics first. Don't try and do them at the same time as you're making the assignments, or make your assignment first and then attach the rubric later. But trying to deal with them all at the same time is probably too much, I would suggest. So what I want to point you towards is your course admin area, which has a section underneath assessment called rubrics. If we go into that area, it will give you your full list of rubrics. And what that means is if you've created one, rubrics like assessments will need to have a separate rubric provision for each task. So if you're going to use this same rubric for multiple cohorts, you're going to need to duplicate it. The way we do that is by hitting the drop down and then copy. And again, the same thing will happen. We'll see the copy in here with the word copy after it. There it is. And if we go in there and then change the title for the cohort that it's intended for example. So if this was going to be for the first assessment for Wagga distance or something, you put those details in the name. what we might do is create a rubric from scratch. Up the top, we've got new rubric. When we open the rubric tool, it asks for a name. Do be specific if you're intending to use it for multiple cohorts, put that up the top. So try and include the text type and the cohort and the assignment number would be my advice. If you know all those things, put that in here. So if this was going to be, let's go for assignment 1. It's an essay, and this particular one I want for auger distance. At that point, we then need to populate our criterion and our scales. Before we get into it, let me show you these menus underneath. Type, analytic or holistic. Analytic simply means a multi-criterion rubric that we're going to be using all the time. Holistic means that it will only give you one criterion. You don't get any more. So if you choose anything other than analytic here, it's going to limit the number of criterion that you can see. So leave that as analytic. Scoring. This is where we get into whether or not you're using a quantitative rubric to handle the marking for you, where we need to know how much each of the criterion is worth, or if it's a qualitative rubric where you just want to select HD, distinction, etc., without providing a score against each of it. So that would be no score if you're doing a qualitative rubric. Otherwise, you can choose points, which is what's selected by default, and that would mean that whatever value is in these cells up the top will apply to every criterion. Probably I would suggest what you're really looking for if you're going to use a quantitative rubric is custom points. Custom points underneath means that you get to define the value for each criterion for each range, for each scale. So the first thing we need at that point is our scales to be defined. So if that was HD, and that was distinction, for example, and that was credit, you'll notice we only get 4 columns to begin with, so we might need to add another one. So if that was pass, and that was our fail column, we have 5 columns at that point. Then we start defining what the values are for each and how much they're worth. Over here on the right-hand side, you'll have a point value. So what's the maximum points, so to speak, marks that you want for criterion 1? If that was going to be worth 20, for example. And you'll notice straight away that it's modified the first column, HD, to the maximum amount. This doesn't impact whether or not you can mark within a range. It simply means that you need to put in the top score value possible for that scale. You can modify all of these, and once you start the marking process, you will still be able to click on their score for that and choose within the entire range. It's a bit hard to see until you actually start grading within it, but
no, that's actually really good, because most of the time we don't give 10 out of 10 unless they got all the math right, but they would be getting an HD. So this is actually really good that we can do within the range. Sorry, should not have talked.
No, that's okay. I'm always happy to hear more.
That was good talking. That was a good sort of talking.
Underneath the actual criterion label itself, if you click within the text, would be where you're going to be putting in your descriptor for the criterion rather than the individual criterion text that you still put in underneath. And what I would suggest here is that you need to make your criterion labels as concise as possible. There isn't a nice way to make this appear.
Here.
Yep, go ahead.
From Chantel, the pass here is a 2.5 out of 10. Isn't that a very low for a pass mark?
Absolutely. I don't know where they got that from, for example, but you would modify that to whatever you want it to be. Yeah, it's just simply breaking down the number of columns by the amount of points and giving it its best first crack, really, at that point. So I think what I would be suggesting, there's going to be some templates around rubrics that are provided as well for people to use that will pre-populate a number of these fields. If I was you, I would be creating kind of your standard sort of qualitative and quantitative type rubric that has these fields, more or less pre-populated, which is what I've done in my rubric section as well, and just duplicating them. No limit to decimal places, Chris? No, I haven't come across any, and they certainly carry through to the grade center as well, but I'm not sure yet if there's rules been put in the schema about rounding and how many decimal places yet. I'll have to come back to you on that one. All right. Now, if we go through, assuming that people have populated each of their criterion and their scores and values, ignore this section down the bottom that talks about overall score. It's irrelevant. It'll be disappearing very shortly. What you're going to see is that whatever value you decide to mark out of in your rubric, it will be converted automatically to the value in the grade center of the task. So the task weighting, if it's out of 30 and you've marked your rubric out of 100, it will convert it automatically to its score out of 30. So you don't have to have a rubric where the points add up to the value of the task. It will do the conversion for you if you're inclined, as some, I'll just quit out of Teams. I know that some people mark out of 100, for example. Nursing, all of their tasks are marked out of 100. And then a conversion has to be done back to the weighting of the task. The system will do that automatically for us. Down the bottom of your rubric, when you're creating it, there are some options, such as, is the rubric visible to students? Is the rubric hidden to students? Well, you can hide it from the students. And there's an option down the bottom that actually says that the rubric's actually hidden from them until the feedback is given to the students. I would argue that's not a bad one to have in place, because they get the rubric from the subject outline if they need it. And this simply makes sure that they don't get to see any of that until you're ready to publish the marks. If you need a description for your own reference around the rubric use, you can provide one there, but that's not going to be visible to anybody else. All right, ignoring the stuff down the bottom here about competencies and e-portfolios. We're not using those tools currently, so that's irrelevant. I think what I would say around making your assignments, and particularly rubrics and shell creation, walk through the quick guides is the best advice I can give you. I'm happy to chat to you offline about any of this, and we'll have drop-in sessions and further follow-ups around this stuff. But your best bet is to walk through the quick guides themselves, because they go into a lot more detail around each of these areas. What I haven't touched on in the session today so far really is looking at quizzes, because what will happen with your migrated subject site is that all of the previous quiz pool questions will have been brought across into Brightspace, but you're going to need to actually scrutinize those pools and determine how you want the quiz to behave. The process is very similar to what it is in Interact 2, but you have to actually create the quiz instance of how it's going to be pushed out to the students. How many points, the breakdown of those points. You also have to proof all of the questions that have been migrated across. So it's still a process that needs to be worked through if you're intending to use multiple choice or other types of quiz questions. They are all pretty much working within Brightspace. There's only one or two question types which don't exist in this system, and I think it covers off across 98% of the question types that we used within Blackboard. I think there's too much there for me to kind of go into that in a whole lot of detail today. How do you deploy a multiple choice question test that has a multiple choice quiz that's been imported into Brightspace? You won't be deploying them in the master subject site. B is the answer. You'll be proofing that the quiz pool is valid, that the questions are all okay, and that they actually have a quiz instance waiting here. So you would be creating a new quiz and pointing to all the right questions. But you'll need to give it a title. Don't give it a grade here. The grade value will be determined by the points that each of the questions has allocated to it. I think I'm going to need to run a separate session all around quizzes by themselves because there's a bit of a process involved with them.
Okay.
Yeah, I might tee up a separate time to go through quizzes with you, B. They need a video and a quick guide all of their own. But
And I suppose, so
yep.
probably lucky sorry, Lockie, probably something worth mentioning is that starting in January, we're going to be having fortnightly at first, but potentially more regularly drop-in sessions where Lockie will be sitting in a room and you'll be able to come in and bombard him with all of your questions. So that'll give you another touch point with Lockie outside of our training sessions if there's something particular you want him to dig down into.
Yeah, I mean, quizzes need more time. They definitely do. They I can show you what they look like in some subjects now, where they've gone through the set and made sure that the quizzes are ready. Let's see if Kath has got some in here. No, she hasn't. What about nursing? Okay, so what you can see here within this nursing subject, for example, is that they have had every quiz instance that was in Blackboard has been migrated across. So someone's going to have to go through here and determine which one of these is still valid, not valid. Here are a whole bunch of module-based quizzes. Rahina, I noticed that they had a question around the sort of the more formative quiz types. They all still can be utilized within Brightspace, but they're going to have to be proofed. So you have to open up each of those quiz instances and have a look at how it's been set up. At the moment, it's saying that, well, it's worth 20 points, that there are, I assume, 20 questions, each worth 1 point there. I can then open those up and have a look at the question pool that's been utilized. It is a very, very simple interface to go through the quiz questions compared to Interact 2, I've found. But you can click on each of those within that instance and see if they need modifying. In this case, you can see that the correct answer has been selected. It'll give you a preview over on the right-hand side of what the question looks like. And then you can actually work with it within the pool if you want. But basically, you're going to have to go through and decide which quiz instance you want to keep using or create a new one from scratch is the short answer. I'm not going to mess around too much with
but what if the
nursing.
quizzes are all okay? Because I have 2 subjects to do this review and both of them has multiple choice quizzes for every single topic.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're all okay, Lachlan, and they're not assessment as a graded assessment, they are MCQs with formative assessment. So would they be then part of content?
I think you can link to them from your content, certainly, but they're going to sit in the navigation underneath your assessment area, right? So underneath assessment, quizzes and exams sit here at the top, right? So you can certainly link to them within your learning materials, but the quiz, to get into it, to dig into it, and for your students to find it quickly, they're going to find it under the assessment area. Right, so you can certainly still link to it from your content, right? It's called a quick
That's an
link.
activity. That's the way we used to have them before. It's one of the topic activities that they have to do quizzes at the end of the topic.
And you can still do that, absolutely.
Good.
The thing that you're looking for when you're working through your content is called a quick link. And a quick link is basically not a hyperlink. It's going to point to another part of the same subject.
Got it.
So if you put in a quick link within your learning materials, pointing to your quizzes, you can effectively embed them almost within your learning materials. Yeah.
And would that be the same for other links like clinical key? Because I know that's an LTI that I2 speaks to. Could we do this?
I'll have to have a look and see how that's been, if it's been set up for you or if they're expecting you to set it up, for example. A quick link generally will point to other internal parts within the same subject site.
Okay, all right.
As a general rule, if you've got an LTI happening, there are other ways to add LTIs in to the content. And I'm happy to show you how to do that as well. Yeah, I think we need more time on quizzes, definitely. They do take a bit more unpacking, and I need a quick
Can we
guide
have
around
it
them.
in December instead of January, because these subjects needs to be all migrated, the ones that we got, very quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, do you want to kind of take that as an item for us to kind of chase up to have another adapt session that looks maybe particularly at quizzes?
I'm definitely happy to do it as long as you guys are happy to show up.
I will, as
Yeah,
long
no
as not
problem.
on Tuesday. I can come any other day.
Okay, we can do that.
We'll take that as an action.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, look, we might stick a pin in this for today, and say that we're looking potentially to have a third session where we can dig more into quizzes particularly, and there are probably some other areas like accessible discussion forums that we can include in there as well. Yep, bring the fluffy cats. Absolutely. I'm keen for some of those as well. I'm going to stop the recording there. I think we might look at